Because you can always pull yourself away from culture and assimilate into new cultures, or ignore certain parts of your culture and not practice them. For example, like abolitionists in colonial America. So I don't think that it's not a race thing, it's not an ethnicity thing, it's specifically related to.
So obviously he sounds very, very, very educated.
All right, guys, we're at the University of Washington. We have a spicy topic today. We are debating that not all cultures are equal and that some are superior. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment what you thought down below. Let's get into it. So what's your question?
Well, I was curious about the poster you had that said, I think every culture is not equal. There are superior ones.
Yeah, so I have a big issue with the sort of modern push to sort of say that all cultures are equal and take away any ability to discredit certain cultures or bad things that certain cultures do. It seems like if a culture has a bad, like blanketly immoral practice, it kind of just becomes one of those things, oh, it's just their culture. It's like, for me, no, it's their culture, but it's not a good thing that they're doing, right? So some examples of these are like especially things that neglect or ignore the consent of women and children. I would say like bride prices, they commodify women, slavery, Nazis, breast ironing.
So this is going to be a good video. The student believes, or I'm not sure if he's a student. I think he's a student. Conservative student believes that some cultures are just bad and some are just good, or some are better. That's a very interesting and brave topic to talk about, especially at a college in Washington. So this is going to be interesting. I'm assuming a lot of the students he will talk to are be more on the liberal side, and they're going to disagree with him. I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm excited to watch this one. Make sure you subscribe and let's get into it.
In Cameroon and West Africa, human sacrifice, female virginity testing in Africa and Asia, basically super invasive testing to sort of prove that a woman is a virgin before she's married off, which is another one, marrying off women and effectively selling them as if they're a commodity to be bought and sold. Forced veiling, so forcing women to veil, forcing women to not speak in public in Afghanistan or to not go to school in Afghanistan. Veiling also happens in Iran. Female genital mutilation, and the list goes on and on. All of those things are consentless, and they predominantly affect women and children. And so I would say that any culture that practices those things is inferior to cultures that do not practice those things.
Okay. I mean, I think that the first issue I have is just like calling one culture superior to another. I also think another thing that might be important to note is like the impact of technology. I know that that's not exclusive to all countries, but I think it definitely does have something like to play in. So how are you distinguishing like between what is something that's cultural versus what is something that's like circumstantial to like the technology available and the information available?
It seems like if something is a practice that is common throughout a specific culture and is generally unique to it or another branch culture, it seems like that would be something that would be a cultural thing. Like, for example, neck banding of children in certain tribes in Thailand and Myanmar. So basically what they do is they'll put a band or a ring around a child's neck, usually women, to meet beauty standards. And then after that ring, they'll add another ring and another ring and another ring and another ring until they think it elongates their necks. And it does make their necks appear longer, but what it's really doing is taking their shoulder blades and shoving them down their spinal cord so that they have this super long neck, but it's not actually their neck, it's their spinal cord, and it's really bad for their health. And the children don't have a choice. It's forced upon them by their parents. And so when a culture practices things like this or allows things like this, or it's okay to do these things within their culture, I would say that they're probably inferior to cultures that don't do those things. For example, if you're a culture that practices slavery, I would say that you're inferior to cultures that don't practice slavery. I would say that modern day American culture is superior to colonial American culture because we allowed slavery. So I think that there should be a concerted effort to push away from these things, even if they're cultural practices among certain peoples. And that doesn't mean that every person who's, a tribal person from Myanmar or Thailand is a bad person or inferior, because you can always pull yourself away from culture and assimilate into new cultures, or ignore certain parts of your culture and not practice them. For example, like abolitionists in colonial America. So I don't think that it's not a race thing, it's not an ethnicity thing, it's specifically related to.
So obviously he sounds very, very, very educated, and just from a fair point of view, I think he's making a lot of sense here. He's pointing out things that are objectively worse, such as objectifying women and objectifying children and selling them off and having slavery. These things are are worse. And if you think they're not, then there's something wrong with you. These are bad things. And yeah, I agree with them so far. I'm not gonna lie. I didn't know where this video was gonna go, but yeah, he makes a lot of sense.
Practices, which are practiced through choice.
Okay. So, I guess, first of all, you would acknowledge that you're part of a culture yourself, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I would say that the danger I see is not like in identifying the wrongdoings or things that might like be harmful in a given culture. The issue I really have is calling one superior to another. I think, like we are really aware of like the neck binding, for example. One thing that's really like apparent in our culture is strong healthcare and like medical knowledge. So I think that makes us very aware of the negative impacts and implications of something like neck binding. I think other cultures have like a lot of things to say about like specifically different practices within our culture in terms of like the ways that maybe mass consumerism or individuality may impact or take away from our collective like functionality or our well-being or something like that. I think it's easy for us to look out and see those negative things very apparently, but it has to be from a culture. It can't be like a perspective that's just omniscient or able to like hold them all equally. I think, yeah.
Well, I mean, it would be my subjective opinion that some are superior and some are inferior. And I acknowledge that there are bad things about every culture, including ours. So, for example, I think one really bad thing that strikes me about American culture is the really unhealthiness of it, the exorbitant eating, the overweightness, the like failure to preserve your own health. But that's something I think is bad, but it's like you choose to do that to yourself, so it's not like an immoral thing. But like so maybe neck binding won't be a good one to open you up to my perspective. I have one that might be good, like spousal rape in the Middle East. Like that's not a thing where we don't understand the health implications. That's just a bad thing to do. You can't rape your spouse. Right. So, but they do that in the Middle East, and it's legal in a lot of Middle Eastern countries. And another thing is not allowing women to educate themselves, or like suti, which is a Hindu tradition where they would expect women. It doesn't happen very often anymore, but they would expect Hindu women whose husbands died to self-immolate to prove how loyal they were. Self-immolating is like lighting yourself on fire. So these are all things that I think are super bad, regardless of how you look at them or what level of information you have. Raping your spouse is not a good thing ever. If your wife tells you no, you should not have sex with her, and you also shouldn't restrict women from literally being parts of society at all. So, all right. Do you believe that all cultures are equal?
No.
You don't? Okay, cool. Why don't you think that all cultures are equal?
There's like a lot of people. So I guess I'll start off by saying I'm very conservative, I guess you could say. Okay. Not really conservative, but like, in between. Sure. I have a very strong opinion about how I think that all cultures are not equal, and there's a very big gap and like fight between them due to the fact that there's a lot of, I guess, in a way positive movements that are being taken in very south direction, being formerly like the BLM movements. Then you also got like a lot of other, I guess, like culture movements. I'm Hispanic. My parents are from Mexico. I've grown up in a Hispanic household. My small town is here in Washington. It's full of Hispanic people there. So it's been a very, I wouldn't say I haven't had a culture shock because I did grow up. Before I moved here, I used to live in another small town.
So he's kind of rambling a little bit, but I will say this. I think I've watched the video enough to give my opinion right now. So some cultures, just based off what he said, they are better depending on what you want your outcome to be. If you want your outcome to be happiness, financial prosperity, wealth, success, love, then yeah, some cultures are better. If you want your outcome to be obedience, what's the word I'm looking for? Nationalism, strength, then some different cultures are better. It all depends on what you want your outcome to be. And that's how you determine what culture is better and what culture is worse.
Where it was predominantly white. I got to meet a lot of people from different races and stuff, and it's really nice. But one big thing that I always notice in my small town, for people who always grew up in there or just like limited there, is that they all have very closed-minded when it comes to other races, and usually it's them like basically kind of like ganging up on and ruining the other cultures, and I heavily disagree with it.
What cultures did you see like ganging up on people?
Usually white people. It's like you rarely hear about it, but
Like they gang up on white people, or white people gang up on them?
it's white people. No, I mean them ganging on white people, or like not necessarily ganging up on them or like being them physically, but it's more or less like kind of like disapproving of their ideals,
Like
or
belittling, kind of, yeah. Like
it's what they think is happening to them, but in reality they're doing it to them, and that's where I'm like, that's not cool, because it's like you're arguing here that, you know, you have all these things that we're like inferior, yet still this small town. I know it's like one town compared to the whole entire like city, United States,
just
but
what you saw, yeah.
but it's like, it's harsh, because then I also like see it from other places, and I'm like, well, yeah, you can say that, and I do agree that there is like, you know, there are people who like, you know, don't agree with you, or who like kind of like, honestly, they kind of, what's the word, they disapprove of you,
Yeah.
because of the fact that you're like this race or you're this other race, and I don't think it's fair. Like from both sides, it's not fair, and I like heavily disagree with it. But to say that I sided with someone is like, I really don't. When people say, oh, but you're Mexican, you should be proud of like being Mexican, and like acknowledging you're you're a minority, you're like this big culture, and you can make such a big improvement in the US. I'm like, yes, I do see it, but the way that you put it and the way that you demonstrate to the world, I disagree with, because I don't think that by putting someone to shame, you're making your culture better. You're just making yourself look like a bigger asshole.
Okay, so
I actually brought this for you, but I think it got cold.
you brought this for me.
So yeah, I'm not going to watch too much of his video, because I'm going to link it down below if you want to finish it. But let me know if you think some cultures are better or some cultures are worse. That's a very, very interesting discussion. It's a very creative video idea. I really like this. But anyways, my name is LFR JoJo, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.